Good evening and welcome. Welcome to the 26th episode, the 26th live stream of Atlas Live. We are Atlas. And tonight we are going to be sharing information about what is still one of the most misunderstood and miscomprehended, misappropriated, misapplied facts of reality, of existence, and certainly of the path of spirituality, of esotericism. And it is this relationship between the light and the dark. Just what is darkness? Just what is light? Why does this duality exist? And if all comes from the one source, from the absolute, from God, from whatever name you want to call it, then how is it that one is superior to the other, or one is preferred to the other? And is not the ultimate goal of spirituality to achieve balance between the light and the dark? We encounter so many times, so often, it's why we have to repeat and have to address this issue and these questions, because we have to comprehend that there is a struggle, there is a battle between the light and the darkness. And that battle is going on inside of us. Without exception. There are no exceptions to this rule. And you might ask yourself, or you might want to say, or the thought might immediately pop into your head. You might want to react to that notion. Say, why does everything have to be a battle? Why does it have to be conflict? Why can't it be peace? Why can't it be balance? Why can't the light and the dark perfectly balance each other like it does in the Tao, in the yin and yang? Does it have to be this animosity? Why does it have to be this battle? Well, what is the reason for existence if there is no challenge? What is the point? How do you know what you are capable of if there is nothing and no one to test you, to oppose you, to challenge you? The modern notions of comfort and leisure and entertainment and consumption, and these notions, you will not find them throughout history, let alone other humanities elsewhere in the cosmos. The only times you find those practices, those lifestyles of indulgence, of leisure, of entertainment, those phenomena only appear during the fall of civilizations. The fall of Greece, the fall of Rome, the fall of Babylon, the fall of Egypt, where decadence, luxury, leisure time, indulgence become the be-all and the end-all of reality for those civilizations. It's all about what they have, what they own, what pleasures they can extract from the wealth and the decadence that their civilization has accumulated over the previous how many centuries it took to build up that civilization, to get it to its peak, to its height. Indeed, even in modern times, we have the notion of retirement, that a human being reaches a certain age and then they no longer work, and now their life simply becomes an exercise of leisure and travel and hobbies, and essentially waiting to die, just waiting to die and trying to extract as much pleasure out of life in the days they have remaining. But even that notion, that concept, you will not find that in the ancient world. Mostly because prior to the industrial revolution, individuals, for the most part, chose vocations which either they were born into them in terms of family lineage. So the blacksmith's father was a blacksmith, and perhaps their great-grandfather was a blacksmith, or perhaps someone was born into a family of bakers, and then they also became a baker. But the difference between a job and a vocation is that a vocation is something you were born to do, and a job is something that you have to do to survive. As a job is something that you don't particularly like or don't particularly want to do. It wasn't really chosen by you in so much as it was available to you. And because you needed a way to survive, you took that job. And then so you may be looking forward to retirement, to the day when you don't have to do that job anymore. And then you've accumulated a whole bunch of wealth. Now finally you're going to enjoy life. But this notion of comfort and security, this notion of leisure, this notion of living life where all we do is travel and seek pleasure and have a good time and accumulate experiences which fall into the wheelhouse of pleasure seeking and leisure and entertainment, etc. That's a wasted life. It's a wasted life. And you can get a sense of that by how many people seek challenge, seek hardship, seek difficulty. And there are individuals who seek out these challenges and difficulties in all different ways. There are those who climb mountains. There are those who deep sea dive or free dive. There are those who do extreme sports and literally put their life in jeopardy to do this activity, which for them, every time they do it, they're seeking to get to the next level, to the next level, to the next level of their own ability. We are explorers of limits, and we seek the revelation of breaking down and breaking through those limits, that which we believed was the limit. Deep down, each and every one of us has a potential. And so long as that potential is not explored, is not exercised, is not put into motion, put into activity, and tested, developed, and taken, not to any extreme, but to the lengths to which that potential was prescribed to us, we will have no real satisfaction. And darkness, the darkness comes when we are not living that potential, or when we are barred from exploring that potential. The darkness exists to challenge and test us. The darkness exists to be the obstacles that we must overcome. And that relationship is an adversarial one. But even as it is an adversarial one, you recognize that even though the obstacle is there to prevent you from attaining your goal, achieving your potential, becoming who you were born to be, attaining your birthright, the obstacles are there to prevent you from doing that. But they are also what catalyze you becoming that, achieving that. The darkness is an adversary of the light, but not its enemy. We've said this many, many, many times. It is an adversary, but not the enemy. But how it serves the light is by absolutely, without question, without wavering, mercilessly opposing the light. Unwavering, unquestioning. The darkness is mechanical, it's methodical. It is like the Terminator. It is heartless and it is soulless. That is its nature. Its nature is to be the opposite of the light, which is, of course, filled with mercy and soul and compassion. What good would it be in the grand scheme of things? What good would it be if the adversary, the opponent of the light, shared some of its compassion, shared some of its capacity to compromise? What good would it do? But it is so tempting in the ego mind, in the intellectual mind. And when we look at the Tao, it's so tempting to see the Tao, to look at the yin and yang of the Tao and say to ourselves, well, that's perfect balanced harmony, right? So that must be what it's all about. It's so tempting to look at this symbol and say that this is what we long to be. 50-50, dark and light. But that is an egotistical, intellectual, superficial, mechanical, and kindergarten understanding of the Tao. Remember what Lao Tzu said about the Tao. The Tao that can be explained is not the real Tao. It's not the eternal Tao. Someone who believes that this is the be-all and the end-all, well, I should say this is the be-all and the end-all, and that achieving balance in one's life and balancing the egos, for example. We need to balance our egos in consciousness. There's a word for that, for someone who achieves that. It's called a hasnamusan, or hasnamus. Hasnamus, singular, hasnamusan, plural. Let's make this bigger here. Hasnamus. This is a term used by George Ivanovich Gurdjieff in reference to a person with a divided consciousness. Part of it is free and natural, and part is trapped in the ego. In synthesis, everyone who has ego is a hasnamus. Although there are many variations and kinds of hasnamus, there are 4 basic types. Mortal, the common person, those with a solar astral body, those with the solar bodies created, and fallen angels. What Samael said about the Hasnamus and the Master Key, quote, "The twice born who does not reduce his lunar ego to cosmic dust converts himself into an abortion of the cosmic mother. He becomes a Marut, and there are thousands of types of Maruts. Certain Oriental sects and some Muslim tribes commit the lamentable error of rendering cult to all those families of Maruts. Every Marut, every Hasnamus has in fact 2 personalities, one white, another black, one solar, another lunar. The innermost, the being, dressed with the solar electronic bodies, is the white personality of the Hasnamus, and the pluralized I, dressed with the protoplasmic lunar bodies, is the Hasnamus's black personality. Therefore, these Maruts have a double center of gravity, a split personality, metaphysically an occult schizophrenic." Gurdjieff described these qualities of the Hasnamus. Every kind of depravity, conscious as well as unconscious. The feeling of self-satisfaction from leading others astray. The irresistible inclination to destroy the existence of other breathing creatures. The urge to become free from the necessity of actualizing the being efforts demanded by nature. The attempt by every kind of artificiality to conceal from others what, in their opinion, are one's physical defects. the calm self-contentment in the use of what is not personally deserved, the striving to be not what one is. Now, if any of that strikes you as being, well, what shall we call it? Desirable, or something to aspire to, then by all means, continue with the delusion that spirituality is about finding the balance between the light and the dark within us. Just recognize that the hasnamus, because it's always easier to fall than it is to climb. Ask any mountain climber. Ask the tightrope walker. When we talk about the path of the razor's edge, we've used this metaphor many times. We have to recognize that the path of spirituality is like walking a tightrope. Now, when you walk a tightrope, you have to be in balance. But what are you in balance of? You are in balance of yourself. And you are balancing, you are constantly balancing, because what? Because the forces around you and the forces within you, including your own fear, any weaknesses you have, any doubts, and gravity, the wind, vibration, distraction, the tightrope walker is surrounded and inundated by phenomena that are trying to get him to fall. And the tightrope walker can fall off to the left or to the right. This is why in the Bible it said, wide is the path and easy is the way, or rather, wide is the gate and easy is the way into hell, and there's many who walk it. But narrow is the gate and difficult is the way into heaven, and there are few who walk it. How many tightrope walkers do you know? This idea that you're going to balance light and dark is a fabrication of the ego itself. It's a trick. It's a way of turning you into a hasnamus, into someone with dual centers of gravity. And someone with dual centers of gravity invariably end up falling more and more into the dark, because it's easier to fall than it is to climb. It is easier to accumulate karma, negative karma. It is easier to fall deeper and deeper and deeper into darkness than it is to climb out of it and into the light. So when you're trying to balance the two, invariably you're going to fail, or you're going to expend so much energy trying to balance the two that sooner or later you're going to run out of energy and you're just going to give in to the darkness, the dark side. And because we are human, if you are truly in that place, that light and dark and that split personality, the good you and the dark you, like Jung said, you have to integrate your shadow self. People misunderstand Jungian psychology. He does not mean you have to become a hasnamus. You have to integrate the knowledge and the consciousness which is bottled up inside of your shadow self. In other words, you have to defeat the darkness. You have to traverse the darkness to get to the light at the end of the tunnel. You have to go through the tunnel. There's no question. But the idea that you're going to go through life with one foot in the tunnel and one foot in the light and call that spiritual whatever is just 100% erroneous. That's like the tightrope walker that says, I'm going to cross this tightrope 50% of the time, maintaining my balance and staying on the tightrope, and 50% of the time falling. Or an airplane pilot saying, I'm going to fly, but 50% of the time I'm going to crash. Or the driver who says, I'm going to drive, but 50% of the time I'm going to drive drunk. Or the husband that says, 50% of the time I'm going to be a loving, caring, compassionate husband, and 50% of the time I'm going to be a wife beater. Or beat my children. Because I'm going to be balancing my light and dark side. That's what you're doing. And there are probably many, many habits and many activities and things that you partake in which you're not willing to let go of and you're not willing to give up. And you use the justification of balancing light and dark in order to hold on to these, let's say, questionable activities or activities which feed that dark personality which you have. This is not spiritual. There is no seed which aspires to be half seed, half tree. There's no seed like that. There is no way for a giant sequoia to be all that it can be and still remain half inside of its seed pod. Right? A chicken can't keep half of itself in the egg. That's just, if we speak in practical, meaningful terms, we realize it's ridiculous. So then what exactly then is this darkness? And how exactly does that relate to other practical examples that we were giving? And why does it exist? And where does it come from? As we said, we like to use the example of playing chess or playing tennis. Have you ever played chess with yourself? Have you ever tried playing chess against yourself, or having a tennis match, or a guessing game, or playing cards? And I don't mean solitaire, I mean playing poker against yourself. You realize it can't be done. I mean, you can do it, but there's no challenge, there's no drama, there's nothing that stimulates neither the consciousness or anything about doing that. It's boring. It's worse than boring. It's a waste of time. Number one, you'll always win. Because even if you lose, you win, right? Because your opponent is you. But you can't actually do it. If you've tried, believe me, I've tried. It can't be done. unless you really have such a powerful split personality that you can literally turn on a dime and, and forget the other personality. That's we can't even imagine what that's like. So we need an adversary. The light needs the darkness. But as soon as we say that, the light needs the darkness, people say, aha, you see? You can't eliminate the ego because the light needs the ego. The consciousness needs the ego. The being needs the ego. You just said so. The light needs the darkness. So you can't eliminate the ego. That's wrong. That's not spiritual, because the light needs the darkness. The darkness came from the light. They're allies. And again, literal, superficial, kindergarten thinking. Ego mind, tricking you. Because of course the ego doesn't want to be eliminated. It was designed that way. To do everything in its power to keep you from defeating it. And why would it have been designed that way? Why would the divinely ordained purpose of ego, of darkness, why would its divinely ordained purpose be to oppose us and do everything in its power to prevent us from eliminating it? Because the path of awakening and self-realization is a path of mastery. And one does not become a master by doing things that are easy, doing things that come easily, by facing opponents, obstacles, challenges, tests, ordeals, conflicts, in which our opponent lies down, is a pushover, steps aside and lets us take the day. That's not how you become a master. You become a master by overcoming insurmountable odds, incredible tests, incredible challenges. And you cannot become a master without that. All of us, bar none, have faced a great many times of darkness in our life. All of us have faced countless obstacles, challenges, tests, ordeals. Some might even call them traumas, traumatic experiences. And we are where we are now precisely because we went through those fires. We went through those caves. And we came out into the light on the other side. And they prepared us for those tests, challenges, obstacles, and ordeals which have yet to come. But there's no greater obstacle we face than the darkness which lies within. There are some comments here we should get to. We didn't have the comment page pulled up, so let's address some of these while we still have them here. How do you know what avenue best expresses the potential? That is what I am working on. Feel like a jack of all trades. All right, that's a good question. How do you know what it is you're supposed to be doing. This, as always, comes down to knowing yourself, observing yourself, meditating, going through life one eye in and one eye out. In other words, knowledge of your potential comes from that aspect of you who is the one with the potential. So I am just a vessel, right? I am a 3D spacesuit so that Atlas can be here in 3D space, speaking to you now. And Atlas's ultimate potential is to be one with Allux, the Christ. That potential is not my potential. It's not Attila's potential. This physical body, this personality, this voice that you're hearing, the audible sound, is never going to ascend. It can't. The physical person, the character, belongs to the game world. I'm like a character in a video game. I belong to this reality, 3D reality. So my innermost player, Atlas, is the one who has the potential. So how do I know what the potential is? I listen to Atlas. I can't receive that knowledge of that potential from anybody but my innermost being and my divine mother. Now, because the capacity for intuition and insight isn't fully developed in most people, this can be a challenge. How do you know? Well, many times, as we discussed in our last live stream on Wednesday, the Divine Mother orchestrates all we need in our life, which means that very often it's a matter of going with the flow of your life. Not always. Sometimes we have to swim against the stream of our life. But how do you know when you go with the flow or swim against the current? Your intuition, your gut tells you. The still, soft voice. And you trust it. You go with your gut. And even though your family says you're crazy, your friends think you've lost your mind, society tells you should be doing something completely different, you follow your heart, you follow your gut. There is an expression that says you don't have to see the top of the staircase. You only need to see the next step. And that's why we say paying attention, observing yourself moment by moment by moment by moment. Okay, let's go to the next. So CCAT says, I question this myself. I think the answer is in the heart, or what inspires us most. I'm not sure either. I was on a path to be a psychologist or drug counselor, but alcohol got in the way, or I got in my own damn way. And now I sell wine and beer at Kroger, working on it. And CCAT follows that up. I think we experience dark moments over and over to challenge us, and we are supposed to rise above it or through it to the light over and over. Yes. Okay. Alcohol and any type of substance abuse, and not just substance abuse, any type of addiction, any type of addictive behavior. It could be gambling, it could be video games, it could be sex, it could be television, it could be Facebook. But of course, alcohol and drugs are the first two that come to mind when we speak of addiction. These phenomena are self-sabotaging in nature. This is a demon of self-sabotage. Now, the demon of self-sabotage convinces us that we need to sabotage ourselves due to a self-loathing, a deeply felt self-loathing. We're not good enough. We don't deserve it. We don't deserve to be loved. We don't deserve to be successful. We are not deserving of any destiny. And self-loathing is essentially shame, the ego of shame. But as we've told you in the past, shame is the flip side of pride. Shame and pride are the same phenomena. Pride is self-absorption. Pride is loving oneself too much. Shame, self-loathing, is hating oneself. Let us go back for a moment to the Tightrope Walker. Visualize the Tightrope Walker. Okay, get that visualization firm in your mind. Okay. All right. There it is, your Tightrope Walker. Now remember how we said he has two choices of how to fall off the wire, off the tightrope. He can fall to the left or he can fall to the right. And the way for him to survive and make it to the other side is the middle way, the narrow way between these two choices. So when we talk about pride being too much self-love on one hand, and shame being self-loathing, self-hate on the other hand, you see, those are the two ways in which we can fall. Because pride, too much self-love, narcissism, has ultimately the same effect as self-hate. And you know how this is true? Cassandra says, shame says, this is all I can be. I cannot change this behavior. Guilt says, I did something harmful. I can correct this and do it better for my well-being and growth. Guilt is a funny thing because feeling guilty can be its own downward spiral. But staying on the point just for a moment here, the absolute evidence, which is not circumstantial and is not anecdotal, look to Hollywood, look to the sporting world, the professional sports, look to all of the places in the world where people attain worldly success in the spotlight. So Hollywood, musicians, Elton John, for example. If you've ever seen the film The Rocket Man, or it's Rocket Man. It's not The Rocket Man. It's Rocket Man. It's Elton John's sort of musical about his life, his early musical career, and him facing addiction. And his addiction was fueled by this horrible, horrendous self-loathing, which was instilled in him from a young child, and shame and guilt and all sorts of false beliefs about himself. But just as he was expressing that and experiencing that in private, he could turn on a dime and just flip a switch and turn into Elton John the performer, the flamboyant, narcissistic, selfish entertainer, performer, who loved the crowds and lavished, and wore his lavish outfits and his signature, crazy collection of glasses and costumes and sequins, and the same desire that people have to seek fame and to seek validation and love from the masses, right? And to be in the spotlight is because there's this deep lack, this emptiness in the pit of their heart. And it's like this, they have the self-loathing, the shame that they're trying to fill with the validation from the masses, from their fame and fortune. And so that's why you see so many musicians and actors and performers and entertainers and sports stars of every stripe falling into addiction of one kind or another. Many sports figures are gambling addicts or sex addicts. We don't have to tell you about all the musicians who get into drugs and become addicted to drugs. That's almost goes without saying. That's almost par for the course of being a professional musician. Certainly in pop, rock, rap, etc. So the relationship between pride and shame, they are the two sides of that tightrope. The two sides of that tightrope. And what is the narrow way between those two? It's radical humility. Humility. Because humility is what gives us the knowledge to get us through, to get us across that tightrope. That humility is what opens the door to the master tightrope walker inside of us, who is the one who is actually qualified to walk a tightrope. Because if you ask a tightrope walker, they will tell you it's consciousness. they do not feel more alive. They do not feel more at home. They do not feel more at purpose than when they are on the wire. And we recommend the movie The Wire, about that high wire artist who walked. Oh no, sorry, it's not The Wire. I'm sorry. The film is called The Walk. It's about the tightrope walker who walked between the Twin Towers while they were still standing, and he actually. Now it would be nice if we could actually just get a picture of it on here for you. But every site we go to, it's just another review or something, and the picture is this big. So okay, this is, maybe we can work with this. So this is I can't remember the name of the Tightrope Walker, but it's Robert Zemeckis directed the film, and it's quite a nice little movie, and it's about this fellow who walked between the Twin Towers in New York, and he sat down on the wire, he lay down on the wire, he did all these things, and tightrope walkers will tell you they never feel more alive than when they are on that wire. Well, someone who feels truly alive, truly in the moment, truly centered, and literally walking their destiny, fulfilling their destiny, that's someone who has surrendered to their destiny, has surrendered to their innermost being. The prerequisite for surrender is humility. People who achieve incredible things, truly incredible things, when you speak to them, you will get a sense they have this profound air of simplicity and humility about them. Like Michelangelo, who said, listen, don't give me any accolades. That 18-foot tall statue of David, which is probably the most incredible, beautiful statue ever made. I mean, it's colossal. And Michelangelo said, hey, I just chipped away the excess marble. David was already in there. I was serving God. I was serving David. I just chipped away the excess. And people who create truly incredible things have the sense of humility about them. Regardless what their other personalities are, or other like personality defects or vices or anything else is concerned. Even Mozart was like this. Mozart, although he has this reputation of being the world's first rock star, he had a very humble way about describing his music. He literally, he practically said, it just comes out of me. But don't attack my music, because I'll defend it tooth and nail, because I know where it comes from. But it wasn't because he was defending his music because he was being egotistical about it. It was because he knew that it was coming from heaven. It was coming from his innermost. He was a messenger, a musical messenger of the gods. The proof is in the pudding. It's in the work. So pride and shame too much self-love, too much narcissism, too much self-indulgence and self-centeredness, or self-loathing and self-hatred. And you can flip from one to the other very easily, very easily. That's why somebody can be at the height of their career, and then one bad review or one bad movie or one flopped album or, who knows what, and all of a sudden, bang, they fall into some alcoholism or some other addiction. Okay, so let's keep going here. You might use the word, the verb, self-conviction, where Brené Brown would use the word healthy guilt that encourages maturing. Healthy guilt. If by guilt what you mean is having a conscience and consciously knowing you shouldn't have done A, B, C, and you should have done X, Y, Z instead, that's consciously knowing. So if you want to call that healthy guilt, I suppose you can call that guilt. Guilt, however, because us having been raised Catholic, guilt was used and is used in Catholicism a lot. And is there such a thing as healthy guilt? Again, if what you're calling healthy guilt is having a conscience, then yes, we suppose there is such a thing as healthy guilt. But the problem with guilt is it's typically associated with shame. And even though you see, shame is narcissistic. It's self-centered and narcissistic. You feel ashamed. You're self-absorbed when you feel ashamed. If you feel bad about something that you've done, you should be feeling bad for the other person, the other people affected, or the lost opportunity costs which you had to pay because of your transgression. But this shame, this guilt, is a self-serving, self-absorbed, narcissistic type of thing. So Cassandra follows it up. You might use the term self-conviction where Brené Brown uses the word healthy guilt. Oh, it's more or less the same thing. That encourages maturing to better choices. Okay. There is no ego which encourages you to make better choices. The egos that you have are always conspiring to get you to make the same mistake again, or worse, to take you into the downward spiral. That's their job. Guilt is like that. Shame is like that. You might not think that. Your mind doesn't want you to let you process that. But think about the alcoholic who goes on a bender, feels ashamed, says, I'm never going to do that again. And 2 nights later, they're doing the exact same thing. And you don't have to be an alcoholic to fall into this, to experience this. How many of you experience binge eating? Binging on Doritos or ice cream or Taco Bell or whatever it is your preferred vices, your preferred snack food. Now, can you tell me after you eat the half a cheesecake or the whole cheesecake or the, the whole pint of ice cream or whatever it is, that afterwards you don't feel ashamed, that you don't feel guilty? Yet how many times have you done this in your life? The way out of that behavior does not come from the ego, which drags you down and drags you into that self-absorbed place. Oh, hey, I shouldn't have done that. Because that's a way of the ego intercepting the conscious awareness of our transgression and wrapping itself around that, so that we lose sight of the actual solution to the problem. Right? So the ego doubles down and creates more suffering, but it directs it in a self-absorbed way. And because shame and pride are the same thing, we're going to be back binging on that Doritos or that ice cream in no time again. Because, oh, I deserved it. I earned it. Oh, I had a rough day. And your mind tells you, oh, you've earned this. So that self-destructive, that self-loathing and too much self-love and self-loathing oscillates like the pendulum mechanically from one extreme to another extreme. And the solution is the middle way. But that solution comes from the consciousness. But the ego wants to keep you on either side of that tightrope. The ego wants you to fall. Doesn't care which side you fall down. Either way, it's got you. That's the way darkness works. That's the fall from grace. And it's cruel. The ego is cruel. It's merciless. It's relentless in how it does this. I think when we get stuck in guilt, it's healthy. So we have to accept self as is, yet strive to be better without guilt attached to where we are now. Acceptance of where we are now, maybe. Just knowing we are always learning. I don't know. Humility. To get out of self-love and self-loathing, too much, okay, when we talk about self-love, we're talking about too much self-love, too much self-absorption, narcissism, okay, and then self-loathing on the other side. And these two are going to play you on both sides, right? And the path down the middle is the opposite of pride, which is humility, to be humble. But the ultimate act of humility is to do what? Is to humble yourself before yourself. Because remember, okay, do you think I am qualified to be telling you all this? Who the hell am I to be telling you all this? Attila, the person, the personality, right? Who the hell am I to be telling you all this? I'm nobody. I'm nothing. I'm not qualified. So how am I telling you all this? Right? Who is telling you all this? Attlas. And where does Attlas get his information from? From Allux. I am a servant of both. Now, that means that the responsibility on me, Attila, is to serve, is to be a servant. I do what I'm told. And by doing what I'm told, great things can happen. I don't have to worry about loving myself too much, of getting caught up in my narcissism about how great I am. No, I'm insignificant. Anyone else could take my place like this, so long as they likewise surrendered and had the capacity to listen and receive and transcribe, transmit. So I'm not special. But just as I'm not special, I'm not particularly evil. I'm not particularly terrible. I'm not a terrible person. There's nothing about myself that I need to hate. Just as there's nothing about myself that I should be particularly attached to. I am what I am, and that's a messenger, a vessel. And that's what I try to work on. And that's what I try to do and make of myself, because all meaning and purpose in my life comes from Attlas and comes from Allux. It comes from Allux, my true self, and the self of myself, the being of my being. Now, does that mean that I don't fall into error? Of course not. Of course we make mistakes. Of course we still have ego. Of course we still have stress and anxiety. In fact, a couple weeks ago, you know that we had to cancel a couple live shows. That's because our father was in the hospital. And we alone look after him in our family. We're the only family member he has left in close proximity to himself. So it's wholly upon our shoulders to look after him. And we don't hesitate to tell you that our vice is food, right? We don't drink, we don't smoke, we don't do drugs, we don't gamble, we don't, we certainly don't, we're certainly not sexaholics, we're not addicted to porn, none of that stuff. So if we have an addiction, although it's not an addiction, if we have a vice that we turn to, it's food. And we can tell you that when our father was in the hospital, and it looked like it was pretty sketchy here and there. It was on the edge. We can tell you that we did a number on the Halloween candy in the house. Right? Now, are we going to sit here and, and we can also tell you that when we binged on Halloween candy, the guilt that we felt after binging only fed the next round of binging. So the guilt and the shame of binging did not help us get out of that cycle. What helped us get out of that cycle is, number one, our father came out of the hospital. Number two, we decided to go on a 4-day fast, which helped break the sugar cycle and the psychological cycle associated with binging on sugar. But we go through that. We go through this. We go through this kind of stuff. When stress and circumstances and stuff get to us, and we have moments of weakness, and we go through, what's the expression? The dark night of the soul. But as a result of all of this, we've also come to profound comprehension and knowledge of just what sugar is, in terms of sugar is probably the most addictive substance on the planet, and probably one of the most harmful. So we've now made a new commitment to overcome our dependency on that particular drug once and for all. But it's not because of shame or self-loathing that we're doing that. It's because of knowledge. It's because of awareness, because of consciousness, because of comprehension. The darkness gives us the impetus of what we need to overcome, but it does not encourage us to overcome it. That's the key. That's the subtle yet key difference. Let's go back here. I meant unhealthy to be stuck in guilt. Yes. I sit in guilt, Atreya says, I sit in guilt and I can clearly see, it is a choice. I'm not making anything better by doing that. I need to choose to step forward and not slide down the slippery mountain. Yeah, it's a slippery slope, guilt is, and shame. Cassandra says, shame would be responsible for stuck guilt, but very unconscious shame. Yes, well, self-loathing, certainly, if you speak to addicts, many addicts don't know that the root of their addiction is self-loathing. They'll blame it on the substance, or they'll blame it on their childhood, or they'll blame it on a whole bunch of different things. Some know, if they're honest, and that's what the whole 12-step program is about, is for individuals to acquire a clarity around their addiction and recognize it as a demon, and recognize that the demon is what the demon is doing and how the demon operates inside of them, and how the addiction, the substance abuse, or whatever abuse, the self-abuse, is a symptom and the modus operandi by which the demon takes hold of us. And it's probably appropriate that we're using the addiction and the self-loathing, because honestly, in terms of an individual, one can scarcely think of a worse situation than being stuck on the treadmill, on the hamster wheel, and the downward spiral of the slow self-destruction of addiction. Like, you're just slowly killing yourself, and you're not enjoying yourself, and your relationships and your career and any hope of what you were here to do gets completely sidelined and completely sabotaged. I mean, when we say self-sabotage, that's exactly what it is. It's in every conceivable way. This is a self-destructive. So we want to talk about like the dark night of the soul. I mean, addiction is that. Addiction is that. But it's not the only example. So here we would like to share with you, if we haven't already, we may have in one of the past live sessions, our experience with epilepsy. Now, epilepsy is also demonic possession. And the two major symptoms that we suffered from, well, there are several. Epilepsy is on the autism spectrum. Like all autism spectrum disorders are some version of some gradient of possession by entities, one or more entities. And epilepsy is demonic possession. We talked about it in our article on fear, and we had various different symptoms, including what we read earlier about Hasnamus, about having this split center personality. We definitely suffered from a kind of bipolar disorder when the demon of fear, which is the demon that possesses us, would express itself as anger. We would become like truly Dr. Jekyll's and Mr. Hyde situation. And when that demon went into the subconscious mind and was raging in the subconscious mind because it wasn't getting its way or because it was afraid or whatever, because fear turns to anger very quickly. Fear is the great chameleon. And so that subconscious raging demon would create on the surface the symptoms of depression. And depression is something that is related to the epilepsy. We also suffered from a very mild kind of Asperger's, where we couldn't read people. We couldn't get a read on people at all. The demon was in the way. And what was in the way was we were afraid of what they were thinking. We were afraid of what they were thinking about us. And that fear, the demon blocked our ability to actually get a read on them of what they were thinking and how they were feeling, because our fear was projecting onto the screen of our mind this fear of what they were thinking and feeling. And you can't, right? You can't receive what people are thinking or feeling if your fear of what they are thinking and feeling is in the way, if that makes any sense. That's our experience of it. But of course, the major symptom, the major, most dramatic, most life-altering symptom, of course, were seizures. Grand mal, partial frontal lobe seizures. We lost conscious awareness. Attila went bye-bye. We went bye-bye. And we lost, we would just would go blank. People who saw us having seizures would say, "You're just not there." That's because the demon was taking control. And we suffered from this for many years. And about, I guess, nine years. It was adult onset epilepsy. We were never diagnosed with epilepsy as a child. It was only as an adult. And mostly because our seizures happened at night. Anyway, won't take you through those details. What we'll take you to is the fact that I eventually went through several different neurologists. None of the medications worked. Nothing worked. I moved home with my parents, and just the seizures kept getting worse and worse. One neurologist put me on this experimental medication, which was a disaster. And my parents just said, "Listen, if you don't get a hold of yourself, we're gonna have you committed." And I ended up looking into the drug that he put me on, and it turns out this drug was completely experimental. It passed the FDA trials. The FDA got its FDA approval with a trial of like 50 people over 6 months. It was ridiculous. And one of the side effects of this drug was psychosis, psychotic behavior. So if anything, this drug was enhancing the capacity of the demon to gain control over me. So finally, I ended up in London Health Sciences Medical Center. That's London, Ontario, Canada, which is probably one of Canada's best medical universities. And there they have an epilepsy center that's run by Canada's top neurologist specializing in epilepsy. And we got in there only because our GP at the time had gone to school with that neurologist. So he pulled some strings and got us in there. And well, they drilled a couple holes in our skull, and we had bundles of cables coming out of the back of our head plugged into the wall. We felt like Neo in the Matrix. And for 2 weeks, we were there in the epilepsy center, lying in a bed with bundles of cables coming out of the back of our skull, and they were inducing seizures. And these electrodes had been placed on our brain under the skull in order to get an accurate read as to what part of our brain the seizures were starting from and going to, and et cetera, et cetera. At the end of that 2 weeks, the neurologist said, okay, well, we know what's happening. We know where it's coming from. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to cut out a quarter of your brain, and we give you 50-50 chance of curing your epilepsy. And in that moment, the still soft voice spoke loudly and profoundly, there's another way. And so we said, okay, well, thank you for everything you've done for me. I appreciate it, but I'm going to have to, this is a big decision. I'm going to have to take it under advisement. That's not the answer that they wanted to hear. But in any case, I came home from the hospital and I opened up the computer. I opened up Google. And opened up Google and I prayed. I prayed to my innermost being. I said, okay, you told me there's another way. Here's what I know. I know that for the past how many years I've been suffering from this thing, and I've exhausted all the faculties at my disposal. I've gone to the best neurologist in Canada for epilepsy, and he wants to cut out a quarter of my brain and give me 50-50 odds. So clearly, I'm not qualified. I'm not qualified. Because no matter what I try to do with this epilepsy, no matter where I turn, I end up in a dead end, or somebody with putting me on some ridiculous drug that's making me a psychotic, or worse, they want to cut out my brain and make me into a vegetable, or you know, God only knows what. So I'm not qualified to deal with this. I'm living the dark night of the soul. This is the darkest, most difficult, most challenging obstacle I've ever faced in my life. I can't solve it. I can't get through this on my own. I'm not qualified. And I prayed, as I say, here I have Google open. This is a window to the world repository of knowledge and information. You tell me what to type, and I'll type it. You show me where to go. You tell me what to do, and I swear I will do it. And I promise, if you help me get through this dark night of the soul, if you help me overcome this darkness, if you show me the way to overcome, to climb out of this pit, to slay this demon that I'm not qualified to slay, then I will commit myself to you and your work for the rest of my life. And the still soft voice said, type epilepsy, diet, lifestyle into Google and do a Google search. And lo and behold, up came, right? Almost 13 million results. Oh God, oh no, now what? You know, relax, relax. The still soft voice said, relax, relax. Just scroll down. So we began scrolling. Now this was a number of years ago, so clearly the results would be a little bit different. But we were scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And yeah, next page. Let's see if the site comes up. These are obviously, you know, Google has been bought out by the corporations now, and it's all advertising. So like the first 50 or 100 links are all paid for links now. It wasn't like that, you know, 10 years ago. There's also a great amount of information here you see about the ketogenic diet. There was very, very, very little about the ketogenic diet back then. And it was certainly not on Google. It was not a popular, because it's been popularized since. So anyway, we're not going to be able to demonstrate it for you in real time the same way. What we're going to have to do is type in what showed up. drj.com. And the still soft voice said, stop, that one, click that. And we clicked it, and this is what came up. Don't know how well you can see that. Maybe we have to zoom this in a bit. Maybe that's a little bit better. It's drj.com, home of the guard. Okay, food intolerances in pets and their people. This fellow is Dr. J. That's Dr. John B. Symes. He is a veterinarian from the United States. And he developed what he calls the glutamate aspartate restricted diet. And with this diet, he has cured tens of thousands of animals and thousands of people of epilepsy, schizophrenia, and all sorts of autism spectrum disorders. It's an elimination diet, which basically eliminates gluten, corn, soy, and cow dairy, and all artificial sweeteners, like synthetic artificial sweeteners. Natural ones are fine. And on this website is more than 10 years worth of his real-world experience and research into what he refers to as excitotoxins, these non-essential amino acids, glutamic acid and aspartic acid, which create a hyperstimulus in the central nervous system and the brain, and can exacerbate autism spectrum disorders, including ADHD, ADD, epilepsy, etc., schizophrenia. And I put myself on this diet, and my seizures stopped the next day. The dark night of the soul for me was facing my demon and recognizing I'm not qualified. The demon is not my adversary. Demon is Atlas's adversary. When have you known the squire to face the Black Knight? The squire serves the knight. It's the knight who must face the Black Knight. We might say, well, I suffer from this and I suffer from that and this and that, and and we talk about eliminating egos and everything else. We're not qualified to eliminate egos. What we are qualified to do is serve our innermost and our Divine Mother. Our Divine Mother has the power to eliminate egos, and our consciousness has the power to comprehend egos. Just as my innermost, Atlas, and his innermost, Alux, the Logos, knew what I had to do, but I didn't know it. They had to show me the way, but they couldn't show me the way so long as I was getting in the way of them showing in the way. I needed to get to a place where I had exhausted all of my abilities and faculties and everything that I knew. And when I was at the end of my rope, I had no choice. But I turned within and I said, okay, you've proved your point. I'm not qualified to handle this. I'm not qualified to be in charge, to be in command of my own life. Because all I am is darkness. Those egos, that demon, that's me. That's Attila. Like Attila the Hun. If you look up Attila in the dictionary, you know what it says? The scourge of God. That's what it says in a Western dictionary. If you look up Attila. Attila was painted as a demon by the Romans, and that's what's left in the history books, right? Raping and pillaging and all this nonsense they wrote about. But in any case, that's my demon. I'm the demon. I'm the Hasnamus, right? The split center of gravity. I'm not qualified. The demon is not qualified to defeat the demon, right? To rise out of the darkness, to overcome the opposition, to overcome the dark night of the soul, requires the faculties, the abilities, the knowledge, the wisdom, which you and I do not possess. Any more than a snowsuit or one of those one of those Columbia jackets can climb Mount Everest by itself. If you take a Columbia jacket and snow pants and an ice pick and some rope and you throw it down at the base of the Mount Everest, that suit is not going to climb up to the top of Mount Everest, right? It can't. Doesn't have the faculty, doesn't have the knowledge, doesn't have the experience, doesn't have the energy. It's just a suit. It's just a set of clothing, mountain climbing gear, perhaps. But that's it. It requires a climber to be inside of that suit. And it's the climber's wisdom, experience, knowledge, skill, awareness, consciousness of his surroundings, feeling the terrain, sensing it, feeling the changing winds, the changing temperatures, when to make base camp, when not to, when to make the ascent to the next base camp. Is it safe? Is it not safe? Is the ice cold enough and firm enough, or is it melting? Is the snowpack, is there an avalanche threat? All of these things. Do you think the Columbia jacket can make these assessments? But you look around in the world today, and all you see are suits, 3D spacesuits, experiencing hell, the darkness, the dark night of the soul. It's called the dark night of the soul, not the dark night of the personality, not the dark night of the person, not the dark night of the character. It's called the dark night of the soul. But all these people are trying to rise out of the darkness without the active participation and guidance of their soul. And they wonder why they fail. And they wonder why they end up right back where they started. And they wonder why they can't do it, why they can't get out of the dark. It's because they're still clinging to this idea that they will ascend into the light. I know that I, Attila, will never ascend into the light. My personality, my body, came from the earth. It's going back to the earth. This person, this vessel, is on loan to Atlas. Atlas gets to use it for the duration of this lifetime. And if things go a certain way, then possibly Allux will be able to use this body as a vessel for a brief period of time. And if Allux does ever embody this body as a resurrected body on the path of the Bodhisattva, then Allux will own this body, and this body can be preserved in perpetuity for the use of Allux to return whenever he wishes into this physical body. This is the true meaning and purpose of mummification. Mummification, which during the golden age of Egypt, that was when Egypt was young, during its golden age, pharaohs were resurrected masters. They were enlightened, benevolent leaders, and that's what it meant to be a pharaoh. And the reason why pharaohs were buried with all this wealth and why they were mummified was because they were Christified masters, and a Christified master can return and reanimate that body whenever he chooses. As Egypt fell into decay and into degeneration, as all civilizations do due to the law of entropy and due to the ego, the later pharaohs kept up the tradition, as a spiritual tradition, believing that because the knowledge had been degenerated and had been taken literally, as all religions happen, and everything falls into idolatry and dogma and superficial literal interpretations. So the tradition of pharaohs believing, it went from pharaohs being resurrected masters into pharaohs believing that they were god men by birthright, that they were born god men. And this is like all monarchs around the world, and all emperors and all bloodlines and all that nonsense. That's all just in Black Lodge degeneration, twisting, and corruption into, well, it's a bloodline and you were born into it, so you're better than everybody else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they kept up the tradition of mummification, but by that time, the mystery schools had truly gone underground, and the tradition of pharaohs being resurrected masters had long since died, had long since passed away. And the Egyptian schools became underground mystery schools. In no uncertain terms, our experience with epilepsy and our experience overcoming epilepsy, the demon, well, not just epilepsy, but the demon of fear, which is the demon that was behind our epilepsy, and facing that and overcoming that has again just been an ongoing process of surrender. Surrender to Atlas, surrender to Analogous, recognizing that I'm not qualified. And as we progress through the Kali Yuga, the answer to the question, right? Right, the answer to the ongoing, the question, how to deal with whatever we're dealing with, it always comes down to the same thing. Whatever you've been diagnosed with, however long you've been dealing with it, it will always lead you to the same place. And that is, I'm not qualified. And if you're not qualified, stop trying to be the one driving the bus. Be a vessel for the light. And this is what darkness is ultimately here to show us. There is no peace. There is no joy. There is no happiness that comes from entertaining or slogging through or trying to, defeat the darkness with your cleverness and your ingenuity and your, any faculty which you do, which you bring to the table. You're only going to end up back where you started, because your Divine Mother is going to keep orchestrating the dark nights of the soul. You're going to keep finding yourself on the wheel of samsara, on the wheel of suffering, until you realize, until you get to the place where you like, okay, I'm at the end of my rope. I'm out of options. I'm out of cleverness. I'm out of websites. I'm out of experts. I'm out of medications. I'm out of procedures. Now I'm ready. I've exhausted myself. I've exhausted all worldly faculties available to me to deal with this. And you pray to yourself, you pray to your Divine Mother and you say, if you carry me through this, if you show me the way, you tell me what to do and I will do it. You show me where to go and I will go there. You show me how to get through this and I will listen to you and follow your guidance. I will be your servant. I will surrender to you. You say this to your innermost. Then what you are doing is possibly for the first time in your life, in a very visceral, meaningful, and practical way, you are opening yourself up to actually being, to being the vessel for your being. Then it's apropos that we were giving this live talk tonight, Treya. But make no mistake, until you make this commitment, until you speak these words to your innermost, until you pledge yourself, give yourself to your higher self, your true self cannot take control and command over your life. Because free will is an absolute law of the universe. Not even the gods can violate that. Not even your higher self can violate that. Your divine mother can do everything in her power to encourage, to motivate, to test, to challenge, she can throw every obstacle in there, everything that we need, all the tests and trials and ordeals that get us to that place when finally we have that conscious awakening that we go, oh my God, I'm not qualified. This life is not about me. Let that sink in. Life is not about you. This I, this body and this personality that you believe you are, that you identify with, that you think you are, that's so visceral. You get up in the morning, you feel like groggy and everything. You need your coffee, you need your shower. Oh, now I feel great. Right? That life is not about that body and that self that feels great after a cup of coffee. That's not what your life is about. It's not about the entertainment. It's not about the holidays. It's not about the accolades. It's not about the material success. It's about none of those things. It's not about your reputation or your fame or your infamy or your fortune, what other people think about you. Life is not about any of that. What life is about is in the wheelhouse of your being. What life is about is answering the question, to be or not to be. To be in the light or not to be in the light. And not to be in the light, by definition and by default, means being in the dark. Ignorant. Being in the light, gnosis. To be one with the light, in the light, illuminated, enlightened, is to have gnosis. Not to be is being in the dark, hypnotized, ignorant. And it's those ignorant masses that are trying to, for example, get their lives back to normal, even if it's the new normal, and they'll do anything to do that, and they'll risk everything to do that. That's why they're getting the needle in the arm, because they want everything to go back to normal, and they'll have their vax passports, and they'll do anything and everything in their power for their comfort and security and their leisure and their entertainment and their retirement and their fame and their fortune and their reputation. And that's why all those people, there's so many people, you know how many people are getting the shot simply because they're afraid of what their neighbors are going to think of them if they don't, and what their family will think of them if they don't. Because of the shame that they're going to feel. They're going to feel ashamed because people are going to point the finger at them and say, "Oh, you're spreading the plague." Our life is not about any of that. Our life is about our being and why our being is here. So you want to know what you're here to do? You're here to serve. Don't worry about the details. The details will come later. You make the commitment to serve. Have you ever heard the expression, the tide raises all boats? Is that right? Does that sound right to you? The tide floats all boats. Something like that. So surrender to the tide within, the ebb and flow of your life. Allow and give yourself to that. And work on becoming the best vehicle, the best vessel that you can be, the best servant that you can be. You know, there's a wonderful film from the, we want to say 80s, but it could be 90s. It's called Howard's End. Stars Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson. And they play the roles of headmaster and headmistress of a household of a British lord who is involved with the Nazis prior to the Second World War, and it's a bit of a scandal, but the whole political and ethical questions aside about Anthony Hopkins' character and his choice to look the other way while his lord, his employer, was involved in shady business. That's not the point of why we would suggest watching the film, but the dedication and the devotion to the vocation of servant. Nowadays, people hate this idea because it's been hammered into us that being a servant is like slavery. It's demeaning, it's demoralizing. But that's mostly because nowadays the service industry is one of the, if not the lowest paid positions, certainly in the West. It's not like that in Europe. In Europe, you go to nice restaurants and stuff, people get paid properly. In Europe, they understand, they recognize that hospitality, the service industry, is a vocation. It's not just an occupation, it's a vocation. You can be a master waiter, like a master bartender, like a master chef. And certainly, in certain circles, if you are a master housemaster, like that's what they're called, the house masters, like the housekeeper, the butler, but he's the head master, he's the head butler, the head housemaster. And if you want to see that depicted in a film, you watch Howard's End, you watch Anthony Hopkins playing the role of one whose vocation is to serve. And he serves unquestioning. It's not the place of the servant to question and to second guess his Lord, his master. Now, clearly, this is an allegory. So in worldly terms, clearly, if you're a servant and your employer tells you to do something unethical or is doing something unethical or against the law or whatever, and you're turning a blind eye, that's an entirely different kettle of fish. But when we're talking about our inner Lord and our inner master and our innermost divine mother, our inner Lord, our essence of the Logos, the individuated essence of God within us, the intimate Christ within us, which is just a seed, just a spark, but still, it will never achieve germination unless it is able to do what it came here to do, unless it is able to self-realize. So if we, as a lowly servant, get in the way of that, then we are doing the ultimate in self-sabotage, because we are sabotaging our true self. And really, it's not self-sabotage at all. It's demonic sabotage. It's the fall from grace. It's the darkness defeating the light. Because the false self, this I that we think we are, is defeating the light in that case. And we are plunging our true self back into a whole new cycle of the dark night of the soul. And we're going back down into hell. And that's why we titled this live stream the way we did, and why we began in the description to talk about this truth. Every angel was once a demon, and every demon was once an angel. This is not some platitude. This is not some philosophical mumbo jumbo. This is esoteric scientific fact. If you want to become a master mountaineer, you have to climb Everest and K2, which means if you want to become a master, an angel, you have a hell of a, you have some sort of hellish darkness to go through and overcome. Look what Master Aburramento, who was already an ascended master, he descended from the absolute to reincarnate and live the life of Jesus and go through and endure the crucifixion and all the other hardships that he endured, and traveling to Egypt to the mystery schools and learning the whole of the traditions of the Egyptian school. Because this is another thing that people forget. That people think that they can be born knowing everything. That's not how that works. There is the forgetting. There is the intentional fall. Like the fallen bodhisattva, for example, or the intentional fall. Someone who falls and takes on a karmic burden. Why? Why would you do that? Why would you deliberately descend into hell? Why would you take on the darkness? Well, why would someone intentionally climb Mount Everest or climb K2 and put themselves through all of that hardship and all that difficulty and all that pain and suffering and all that putting their life at risk. Why would they do that? And for them, it's only a matter of just becoming a master mountaineer, just to be able to say, I did it. I climbed Mount Everest. But imagine if the mountain you're climbing and the accomplishment of climbing that mountain has a profound impact on others. Of being able to, why descend into hell? So you can reach out a hand and guide people and pull people out of hell as you rise. The tide floats all boats. If you can go down into hell, that's what all bodhisattvas do, by the way, after they die. That's what Jesus did. For 3 days, he descends into hell. 3 of our days, but for the bodhisattva, it's an eternity. In hell, saving souls. Helping souls awaken. They're in hell, but they can be awakened and then they can return. And they can have a chance in the kingdom to continue that work and make their way out of hell. To rise up out of the darkness into the light. So this relationship between light and dark is the eternal struggle and the eternal relationship. It has to be there. It has to be there. But for each individual, it has to be there in the same way that when you're playing chess, you need an adversary. But you don't play chess to try to get a draw. And you don't play chess to lose. You don't play tennis to lose. You don't play any game to lose. And you can say, oh, no, but you play for fun. Okay, sure, you can play for fun. You can play for fun for a while. But eventually, if the name of the game is to become a master, and remember, we're only talking about becoming a master of yourself. If you keep just having fun all the time, and you never get to the mastery of yourself, well then you end up as a Hasnamus. And remember also that we only have 108 lifetimes as in the human kingdom to master ourselves. And then we fall back into devolution. Every game has a time limit. Every video game has, maximum number of lives, or, any other sort of time limits or other penalties for, playing it indefinitely. Unless, of course, the game is designed to be played indefinitely. But those are video games on the world. This game, it is designed to be played indefinitely from a certain point of view, from the perspective of the monad. However, you cannot play indefinitely as a human being. If you're unable to overcome your egos and overcome your karma in 108 lifetimes, you have no choice but to enter into devolution. You go back into the animal and the plant and the mineral kingdom until eventually your monad is wiped of all of its experience, of all its experiential knowledge, and all its karma. And you're reinserted into the mineral kingdom, a fresh blank canvas. And then you begin the journey all the way over from the beginning to the mineral, the plant, the animal, and then finally the human kingdom again. That's why it's called the wheel of samsara. Because that journey of the monad, that can go on indefinitely. And you can indefinitely go through millions of years as a rock, thousands of years, millions of years and countless lifetimes as a mineral, as a rock, and then thousands of years and countless lifetimes as a plant, and hundreds of years and countless lifetimes as an animal, and then finally hundreds of years and 108 lifetimes as a human being, as a humanoid. And then if you don't make it in those 108 lifetimes, then it's back down the other side. And that's so to rise up out of the darkness into the light and then fall from grace back into darkness. And we say back into cruelty because We all know that the darkness is cruel. It's mercy in its own way, but only if we make use of the severity. We've said very often, love is severity and mercy. So the light and the dark reflect that. Light, mercy, dark, severity. But the darkness is divinely ordained to be cruel and merciless and clever and crafty, subtle. Do not underestimate the darkness. Do not underestimate the adversary. And recognize that you are not qualified to defeat it. You are it. You are your own adversary. We are all our own worst enemies. So the path to all of this, as we said, it's the first step is humility and recognizing who is it that's qualified. Who but the light is qualified to overcome the dark? And if we are in the dark, and we are part of the dark, we're not qualified to overcome the dark. It's impossible. All we can do is reshuffle the chairs on the decks of the Titanic. That's all we can do. We can't stop the Titanic from sinking. You will die and so will I. I will die and so will you. We all will. We're going back to nature. We're going back, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. But before that happens, can we awaken? And can we do what's necessary? Can we serve our innermost being so that when we do die, we take the next step in the journey as a bodhisattva? Okay. Nick says, I wonder, is it too late to achieve Christ consciousness in this life? After sinning so much, even though you have been given much divine knowledge and therefore you sinned even harder, since for little they know and much will be forgiven. And for a lot of knowledge, thank you and may God bless you. Well, you're very welcome and thank you for the kind words, Nick. Here's the answer to your question. Every angel was once a demon. Redemption is there for all of us. But the path of the bodhisattva, the path to Christification, is the hardest path there is, because that path is living a life of suffering and sacrifice for humanity and paying all of one's karma in one lifetime. So is it possible? Yes, it's possible. Is it possible while you're fornicating? No, it's not possible. If you are indulging in the orgasm, if you are indulging lust, it is not, you cannot walk the path of the bodhisattva. You cannot awaken if you're fornicating. You can't. Because lust is the mother of all egos. Lust is desire, craving and aversion. So the sins of the past, that's the past. Now we have to look at how you will atone for the sins of the past. And that means working for humanity, on behalf of humanity, and on behalf of the end of suffering of all beings. and suffering and sacrifice for humanity, and not adding to your karma, not creating more egos, not indulging your lust, your greed, your laziness, your pride, your fear. Not everyone is here on the path of the Bodhisattva, right? It's not something that you can choose, really, in strictest terms. You can choose the path of sexual alchemy. You can choose the direct path. You have that option. You can do the practices. You can work on your egos. You can work on karma. You can practice sexual alchemy. That's white tantra, right? That's sex without orgasm. You can do all these things. This does not guarantee that you will attain that level, or that you are here walking the path of the Bodhisattva. Because the path of the Bodhisattva, from our point of view, from our perspective, from our experience, comes from within. That's a decision, that's a choice that our monad makes, that our innermost being makes. So Attlas is on the path of the Bodhisattva. Attlas chose that path for us, for me. I did not choose that path. I surrendered to it. I was on that path, and well, I already told you the story where I finally got the dead end and the end of my rope, and I said, I'm not qualified to walk this path. So then I surrendered to the one who is qualified to walk this path, and that's Attlas. And the reason why he's walking that path is to eventually incarnate Allux, who, let's face it, is the one who is really behind these words and is really behind this work. Because Attlas surrendered to Allux. And Attlas longs to be one with the Logos. So this is a very, very intimate relationship and an intimate knowledge that comes from within, that only you can know for yourself, through yourself. No one can tell you or explain to you, or we can intimate, we can suggest, we can share with you our experiences, but really only you, your innermost, your divine mother, and the being of your being, the Logos, can. This is between that microcosm of your beingness, your being, and the different levels of your being, and where you fit into that, and where you are at in terms of your journey of many lifetimes. But it's true that not every monad walks the direct path, the path of the, so many monads walk the spiral path, which is, let's not get into that tonight, because that's another, let's not get into nirvanis and pratyeka buddhas and all that stuff. Those are monads that are in nirvana and reincarnate, and they have earned the right to reincarnate almost indefinitely. And they come down, they work a little bit on themselves, they work a little bit on their ego, they help humanity, they're relatively good people, nice people, whatever. And then after the life, then they go back to nirvana, because they already earned the right to be there. They're Buddhas, they're enlightened, they're awake, but they're not masters. And because they're attached to nirvana, they do not, what's the right word here? they've grown accustomed to the joy and the happiness and peace of nirvana, and they have lost the passion that the servant feels, or that the soldier feels, or that the knight feels, to sacrifice himself for the sake of others, for the greater good. That's a passion, that's a fire. That fire is the fire of the Christ, the cosmic Christ, the fire of the fires and the light of lights of the Christ, that gives us that intensity to give of ourselves and to do everything within our power to be what we can be and fulfill our destiny, and to suffer every indignity, to suffer every physical hardship, to endure whatever this world can throw at us, but we will not be stopped. We will not be deterred from doing the work of the Christ, of the Logos. That's why Mel Gibson called his film The Passion of the Christ. That's what passion means. What are you willing to suffer and die for? That is your passion. That is your passion. That longing, that passion for the Christ to come and reach out and touch people in their hearts, and it's like relighting the pilot light in their hearts, so that they can then turn up the gas, and their hearts can burst into flames. Like the music of Mozart and Beethoven and Wagner can do for us. Or some of the films that we share on our blog can do for us and have done for us, like Star Wars. Star Wars has kindled a flame in the hearts of so many people. And yet, the darkness is so clever. The egos are so clever. They've taken that flame, they've taken that passion and turned it into idolatry, turned it into cosplay, turned it into fandom. And fan is short for fanatic. Never forget that religious fanaticism is fueled by genuine passion. All those religious fanatics, all those idolaters, all those fans, and dressing up as their favorite superheroes. They're passionate. They are so passionate about the material. How can they be so passionate about comic books? Because comic books are archetypal. Those superheroes are just the modern day equivalent of Greek gods and Norse gods and Roman gods and pagan gods. But the stories and the characters are archetypal. It's the same bloody allegories, metaphors, and symbols. In other words, it's the same universal truths. Good versus evil, light versus dark, the development of superpowers, the suffering and sacrifice for humanity. Superman, Wonder Woman, and other heroes like the Dark Knight, right? Batman, who's suffering through the dark night of the soul, and he's trying to make of the darkness and all of his suffering and trauma, he's trying to pull the light out of it by working through the darkness. That's why people can be so passionate about that stuff. The problem is they're not passionate about the right things. They become identified, attached, fascinated, obsessed, hypnotized by the visuals, the stories, the characters, the dialogue, the artists, the art style. They become distracted by the surface level. And the fire, the passion that they feel that's been kindled inside of their heart is the fire of the Christ, the fire of the Logos, which is speaking directly to their heart through those images and symbols and metaphors and allegories. But their ego mind intersects, filters, grabs that fire and says, yeah, we can use that. And they become so passionate and so fanatical. You look and see those guys with their man caves, those nerds, with literally thousands of action figures mint in box, and hundreds upon hundreds, if not thousands of comic books in plastic cases, filed away neatly in boxes. And they have their toys, and they have their posters, and they have their sign this and their sign that, and all their paraphernalia. And that's their little sanctum sanctorium, the holiest of holies. That's their altar. They're surrounded by their own little temple, their own little church, and they've surrounded themselves by all the idols that they worship. It's idolatry. And then once or twice a year, they go to a Comic-Con and they dress up. They dress up as Gandalf. They dress up as Superman. They dress up as Batman or Stormtroopers or Boba Fett or whatever. Because it's easier to pretend to be a god than it is to be a god. It is easier to dress up like a superhero than it is to live the life of a superhero. So, darkness is not just what we process on this, what we process as obviously evil and obviously dark and obviously painful and suffering, and right? Darkness is subtle. Darkness and is clever. The Black Lodge is clever, and it's subtle, and it's tempting. It's oh so tempting. The darkness of this humanity, as we said at the beginning, leisure, entertainment, pleasure, indulgence, partying, happiness. Look at that concert that took place recently. That one that was this. People have been talking about this gigantic satanic ritual which took place and ended up taking the lives of hundreds of people, even though the news only reported that it was about a dozen or so. But it's been all over Facebook and the internet and stuff. I mean, all those people were lured there under the promise of a great party and great music, and probably you'll get lucky, and probably you'll get access to easy drugs, right? You're going to have a good time. People love their idolatry. People love their fanaticism, because it's far more. It's way easier, and it's not the first time. Like cosplay and all this stuff, it's been around for a long, long time. The Dionysian festival of the Greeks started out that way, and then there was the Rococo period, where it's much the same thing took place, and then the Roman period. People would have these lavish parties, throw these lavish parties. People would dress up as pagan gods and centaurs and satyrs and and fairies, and they would go out into the garden. They would all get wasted, and they would have these drunken orgies in the garden. But it was all under this, like, the springtime fertility festival and all this stuff. So it was like they were just reveling in springtime, and they were reveling in life, and they were all just partaking in what was natural in nature, and the gods do it too, right? Because in all the mythologies, the gods are always having sex with each other and stuff. So they were all just playing. They were just playing the role. They were playing out the stories of mythology. Because that, number one, it was pleasurable. Number two, it was easy. 3, it was tempting. But did it get anybody anywhere? Does dressing up like a pagan god, getting drunk, and having a wild orgy in the garden, is that going to awaken you and help you achieve your self-realization? Is that how the gods behave? In the stories and the myths that are allegorical, that all teach lessons, they're all morality plays. They all have a lesson to teach. But if you read them literally, like people read all literature and movies and everything, everybody reads everything literally now and intellectually. Nobody knows how to read with their heart and read with their intuition anymore, and unpack the symbols and see the universal truths that are being communicated by symbol and allegory, which is the language of Absolute, which is the language of the supernal worlds. Life is communicating to us that way, in symbol and allegory. And when we are in the dark night of the soul, when we are in darkness, we should always be looking for the allegorical, archetypal circumstances that we are finding ourselves in, because therein lies the lesson that we are to extract. Just remember that you're not qualified, and I'm not qualified to extract that lesson. That lesson is there for our being, for our consciousness. Would anybody else like to make a comment or ask a question or share a thought or an experience on this issue of darkness and light and moving from one to the other, and the cycle between the two and the relationship between the two? Have we made it clear? If you want to read about the Hasnamus, George Ivanovich Gurdjieff is an excellent resource, but so is Samael Aun Weor. We no doubt will touch upon this again in the future at some point. Again, we reiterate that our purpose, our mission is to make these live streams and our articles and talks and everything that we do as practical as possible. So we try to keep things in a actually very narrow and tight frame. So if no one has any other thoughts or questions or anything, then we'll say goodnight and have a great weekend, and hopefully we'll see you guys all next week. So sign off. Inferential peace.